suppliers are taking part in this pivot towards the manufacture of healthcare equipment, including ventilators. Flavio Volpe is president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He's with us now. Flavio, great to see you. And let's just talk about kind of where we are at with our suppliers and what it is that they're participating in.
So we saw this early, I think the middle of March. We saw export controls being enacted in places like the EU, and we thought, look, if we're going to be short, supplies that we need from our trading partners, then perhaps the thing that we need to do is get into the manufacture of it. We can do it at scale. So now, about 4 weeks later, you have auto parts manufacturers in ventilator and ventilator parts, face masks, face shields, gowns, and in test swabs. Pumping out in most cases in the hundreds of thousands and eventual contracts in the millions. This is not a profitable venture, but every one of them, these companies are leaders in their communities. And it's if we can't keep our families safe and our neighbors safe, how do we ever get back to work anyway?
So just in terms of kind of the regular business, I assume that the supplies have essentially regular manufacturing has come to a halt. Is that the case across this industry, or is there still some work in progress for parts suppliers?
There's very little work in progress. The car makers have essentially all shut down across the continent. They did it in the second half of March. And so there was some work building up inventories for about a week or two. But for the most part, if you're an auto parts manufacturer, you're not making anything in volume. You're keeping the plant ready. You're reworking the workspace so that when people come back to work, we have safe workplaces. But the vast majority of the people that work for us are on some sort of layoff. And there's no inputs coming in, and we're not making parts and delivering them.
Some of the businesses, and Magna comes to mind because they had an innovative product that, as I understand it, loosely had to do with removing the odor from hockey equipment, which I imagine was something customers would want for their trunks if they have children who play hockey, that they were pivoting that for use in medical ways. How much of the work being done here is a slight pivot that allows them to build off investments they've already made and can go back to, Flavio? In other words, that this will actually build on something that's of value to their business in the future versus a complete departure, a sunk cost into something that once the COVID-19 pandemic's over, it does nothing for them?
It's mostly the latter rather than the former. It's the facilities are useful, the workforce is useful, much of the production line is useful, but you're making specific tools to fabricate these products. Those tools are only good for those products. This is an industry that ships about $100 million worth of auto parts every day. And if we do, $500 million worth of medical products in total, I'll be very surprised. So it's not an income replacement. It's not a line of business that most, if any, will be in later. But there are some very specific companies that are building practices in the medical side that may last. We've seen Linamar do it, and Linamar did it late last year, and we see a company, one of the 5 biggest Canadian suppliers, ABC Technologies, open its medical products division. So we think that there is, I think there's going to be some change in public policy to see how we keep pandemic planning as part of good public policy. And I think some of these companies will be in there long term, but for the most part, when we start making cars, other than the companies that have contracts to deliver, and they will deliver on all those contracts, everybody's going to go back to making the car parts.
Just seeing a breaking news flash here, Flavio, that DBRS Morningstar has put Magna's debt under review with negative implications. Magna, one of the companies that suspended its outlook, but noted that it did have cash on hand. It was reassuring investors that its cash position is stable. This is going to be a difficult time. So just in terms of the stability of your members and the other side of this pandemic, how concerned are you about the outcome here?
Well, you can't go for an extended period with no revenue and not burn through all your working capital. And I think that that's the same for everybody. I think that what we're talking about is a scenario where 2 months, 3 months down the road, much like in other industries that have less runway, we're going to be having those same discussions. A lot of companies like Magna were very well managed on the way in and have a lot of those buffers and cushions. And of course, Magna has operations all around the world, including operations in countries that are coming back up. So here in their home country, we're looking at a scenario where we are in the middle of the lockdown. But also those companies like Magna that have those international operations get to learn the best practices of getting back to work from their subsidiaries. I'm not worried about the bigger companies. We worry a little bit about the smaller companies, the tier 3s and the tier 2s, who do not have that cushion, who, if we don't go back to work, if we don't find a way as a society to do that safely and also get demand back online, we'll have some issues.
We may also have issues with the big original equipment manufacturers. Flavio is looking at some headlines earlier today about Ford raising the specter of yet another bailout for big auto. Is such a thing even remotely possible?
Well, I think you're asking questions, and we're talking about automotive because, of course, that's the business that I'm in. But I think writ large, the economy is going to be looking for that. I think what's important to understand is a lot of these automakers and the part suppliers have stepped up to say, look, if one of the things that we need to go back to work is that we all need to be safe. So we'll get into, with our capacity, the making of PPEs and ventilators. But there's a finite capacity to do that. And then the thing that's most important for these automakers, just like in everything else, is when is the market going to pick back up? When are people going to want cars? We have the capacity to get back to work, but I think that in a groupthink across the economy, we have to understand the dynamics it's going to take to get people back to buying things. And if you don't get back to buying things, and if we lose a manufacturing sector, I think we lose our capacity to respond to big crises like this. Much like in war during a pandemic, the people on the front lines need things to get between them and a threat. And the reason that we're faring well, I think, in some jurisdictions here, is that we've got a capacity that if we lose the ability to procure from other regions, we can make them here, and we can put a mask between a doctor and a nurse and their patient. So ultimately, there is a public interest in the end that if these companies need help after, then we should absolutely get there and help them out, because the next time we have a problem, who's going to make the stuff we need?
All right, Flavio, great to have you with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Flavio Volpe is president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association.